You are now watching the Amazin Mets pregame show with your hosts, Rob and CP.
Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets!
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to the Amazing Mets pregame show with myself and the man next to me, CP. And we are back home at Citi Field after the London series, after that extravaganza event that we went through. I mean, it felt like those two games were like the last baseball games in the world, the way they kind of promoted that game, except for Fox and ESPN. But we split the series in London in dramatic fashion with Luis Torrens, the play of the week, making that double play to win the ball game for the Mets. And now they got the Marlins, one of the worst teams in baseball, and they need to beat them. So let's say what up to CP. And how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Apologies for the switch over on the streams. Hopefully everyone in the previous stream can navigate their way over here, but it was a last minute switch up. Nonetheless, we are here to talk about Mets baseball. Hopefully, I'm kind of just scrambling here. Hopefully I sound good. We got a lot of good things to talk about, Rob, because this upcoming homestand means a lot to this team. Shout out to Josh, Robert, Junior, everybody in the chat right now. Kenny, I appreciate you all being here. I hope that you all are energized or re-energized, amped up, because this is meaningful baseball. And we're talking about June 11th, 2024, where these games matter to this team that's only 3.5 games back of the wild card, regardless if you want to engage in any sort of wild card talks or not. We are here, and we need to see sound baseball. So salute to everybody. Appreciate y'all being.
Absolutely. And yes, we got some changes. Obviously, we got our catcher back in Alvarez. Unfortunately, Nito had to get DFA because Luis Torrens played. And you know what? Tomas Nito, a nice tweet, thanking Mets fans for the 12 years he was with the organization. And that's a long time. And you know what? He was a pro's pro. He never complained about playing time. There was many times when he could have probably been the starting catcher, as bad as the Mets catching situation was for a while. And he never complained, getting sent down, getting bounced around all over the place. He could have easily, said, guys, just let me go. Let me see if I can start somewhere else. But he never did. He loved this organization. And shout out to Tomas Nino for, doing what he did, because there's a lot of times when, with the Alvarez injury, the James McCann not ever showing up, playing any good, Nito was always there. And I think that's important to realize, that the Mets need players like Tomas Nito because they believe in the organization. And I think a lot of players go away from that. And I think seeing Tomas Nito did what he did and never complain, I think that's a great sign that Tomas Nito left on a good note. Unfortunately, you know what? Luis Torrens has just been out of his mind in the last, week and a half since he's been here. So listen, it is what it is. But Chris, I want to talk about Francisco Alvarez, because we talked about how important he is going to be into this lineup, right? He is batting 8 tonight. I understand they want to, smooth his back in, slowly. And, I'm a little upset. I said it on the roundtable. I wanted him up at the top somewhere, maybe fifth. I don't like the Marte situation in fifth, but he's been hitting well, so I can't really complain about it. But it does lengthen the lineup at the very least with Francisco Alvarez. So, I think we all believe that Francisco Alvarez is going to bring this different energy to this lineup that, let's be honest, has been lacking ever since he's been gone, a month and a half ago. So what are your thoughts about Francisco Alvarez coming back and the Tomas Nito unfortunate DFA?
You know what? I'm going to echo exactly what you said about Tomas Nito. I've been screaming at the top of my lungs. I know a lot of Mets fans out there as well, with the way that Luis Torrens has played ever since coming over from the Yankees. David Stearns, you for bringing him in for some cash considerations, and Mr. Narvaez, who every Mets fan loved Mr. Narvaez in his time here. No, I'm just kidding. That was sarcastic if you can't tell. But no, true pros pro, Tomas Nito. Salute to everything he did for the organization. Salute to always just being willing to do anything it took, whether it was starting, whether it was being a backup or third string, or even going down to the minor leagues. Never seemed like he was going to complain. Seemed like he was a good character in the clubhouse. But with that being said, in terms of the actual talent level, I'm not shedding any tears that he's gone. That's no disrespect to the ball player that he is, because we know Tomas Nido's ceiling, and I wish him the best of luck wherever he goes. But quite simple, I think the potential plus side of Luis Torrens, who's just been an absolute gem since coming over this Mets organization, definitely was the right move. And by the way, what coincides with this Nido DFA is also the Phillies announcing that JT Realmuto is out for the rest of the season, I believe with some sort of knee injury. So maybe Tomas Nido pulls a Luis Guillorme and ends up with an NL East rival there in Philadelphia. Wouldn't that be something? But nonetheless, I agree with you. Francisco Alvarez, this team went like 17 and 30 something without Francisco Alvarez in this lineup, and this is going to be a huge jolt. I predicted that when he came back, he'd be hitting in the 7th hole. Obviously, he slots one more down into that 8th hole. It definitely lengthens the lineup. I'm not mad about it at all. And the thing about it is that Francisco Alvarez has such an impact on both sides of the ball, because when you talk about a lower half of the lineup that has been sort of hit or miss, they started off really hot and then they got cold. And we talk about them versus the core and who's carrying this team. Well, now as a pitcher like Jesus Luzardo, who we'll talk about here in just a second, that did really well his first time around against this New York Mets lineup, sees Francisco Alvarez batting 8th. That's sort of protection for Harrison Bader and Mark Vientos. And I'm not saying they need it, but it definitely helps them, because those guys are going to get pitches to hit by default now, and they don't have to worry about sort of just drawing walks. Like, of course, Jesus Luzardo could go out there and walk them, but more often than not, he's going to be putting pitches in their wheelhouse, because we presumably think that he doesn't want to see Francisco Alvarez, who has huge home run potential, coming up with runners on base in the bottom of that lineup before the lineup turns over to the top of the lineup. So that is his impact offensively. And I like the strategic placing. I think it's a combination of strategic placing, lengthening the lineup, like you said, but also just easing him back into this lineup. He had a finger injury, thumb injury. I forgot exactly what it was, but that affects his grip. So, he wasn't completely tearing the cover off the baseball when he went on the IL as well. So we'll see how he sort of eases back, but just his presence was greatly missed. But defensively, man, we talk about obviously Narvaez and his lack of defense, and that how it was night and day when Tomas Nido and Luis Torrens sort of got into the fold. The framing and the communication with this pitching staff that Francisco Alvarez is going to come back and reinstate is going to go just beyond levels than what we all realize. Like, this starting rotation has been serviceable, minus with the exception of a couple names, cough, cough, Jose Quintana. But the rapport that Francisco Alvarez, as a 22-year-old just kid still at the MLB level, right, and only a second year, it's so refreshing to see the relationships that he builds with his starting pitchers, right? We saw it last year with the veterans in Scherzer and Verlander, and we're going to see it again, especially through this crucial homestand and beyond, as long as he's on the field. So, let alone the fact that he's an absolute vibe in this clubhouse that needs a vibe like that in this clubhouse, because we've been talking about how at times they've looked dead, especially in the bad stretches. There's no energy. There's this, there's that. Francisco Alvarez, as a 22-year-old kid in this league in his second year, probably, maybe outside of Francisco Lindor, makes the second greatest impact on this overall team when you take into account everything that he is a part of within this team. And that's just a testament to the player and the person that he is.
Yeah.
So happy he's back. When I saw that news, I got ecstatic. I released a short on my YouTube channel. I had to talk about it because this is going to pay dividends for the New York.
Yeah, absolutely. You and me both put a short out there about Alvarez. And you know what? You took the words right out of my mouth, because I wanted to bring up the pitching staff with Alvarez. Since Alvarez has been gone. Now, again, we weren't expecting Nido or Torrens or Narvaez to, make this rotation as good as it could have been, or at least that what it was early in the season when Alvarez was there, because it seems like the pitchers love Alvarez behind the plate with the pitch framing, like you said, and just the vibe that he brings, the energy he brings. And the Mets have just under a 5 ERA since Alvarez has been out, and it's been under 4 when he's been in the lineup and been the catcher in games. So the pitching, you give credit to the pitching early on, they were good, but it could have been a lot to do with Alvarez, and we'll see, right? If the pitching turns around, if Jose Quintana actually, shows up and actually pitches like Quintana should pitch, as we all thought he would, and be a serviceable pro instead of a disaster, and the other guys as well, if Sean Manaea doesn't blow up, or Luis Severino has been good for the most part for the whole time, but maybe he can be even better because he was outstanding with Alvarez behind the plate. So we're going to see if Alvarez is a bigger impact, not just with the bat and helping his lineup, but behind the plate with the pitching set. Because if the starting pitching starts to figure it out again, it's going to be hard to beat this team. I know the bullpen still has an issue, but you know what? With Hauser being in there, you still got Nunez and Young, who 3 guys that can really be trusted for Carlos Mendoza. And Diaz will be coming back very, very soon. And he's been pitching, again, it's the minors. It's nothing to go crazy about. But if you look at the games that he's pitched, his fastball is a little bit harder, right? You see that little burst of energy, that power coming off the mound again. Maybe he was actually hurt, and that impingement was a fact and was a problem. And it wasn't his leg. It could have been that, because if Diaz is 75% of 2022, this bullpen with Hauser, Young, Nunez, and now Diaz, this team is going to be hard to beat, because I think this lineup with Alvarez, I mean, look at all these guys. Look at this lineup right now. Who is really not hitting besides maybe Nimmo, who kind of did his job in the last game of the series? He hasn't been, but other than that, everybody's been hitting. Iglesias is hot. Look, McNeil's not in the lineup again. He played 1 game. So that's interesting again. And a lot of the rumors are spilling, or a lot of the noise is spinning against for McNeil again about he might be out. I feel like he's going to be out. Like, I think they're ready for Acuna very soon. And Iglesias is doing the job right now. And you know what? Luis Torrens took Nito's job. I know Nito is nowhere near McNeil's possible talent level, and he was a starter on his team and getting paid. But let's be honest, Chris, this is another game where I would have thought, I know it's a lefty, but McNeil's your starter according to Mendoza. So
No, I agree with you. And the funniest thing about this all is that it just cracked me up, because it has nothing to do with on-field performance, but Jeff McNeil threw out that he could be a cricket player during that London baseball classic. And it's just you're just adding fuel to everybody else's fire. Like, just go play every other sport in the book, whether it's golf, whether it's cricket, and just give baseball a break. But no, nonetheless, like I said, McNeil's been brutal. I believe he did get a hit in that second game, late in the game as well, after a couple of ground outs to second base to start off the game. I don't know, man. It's just the overall impact of McNeil. And it was nice to see the Mets turn double plays with Lindor and McNeil up the middle when he finally got back into the game. But that infield just looks so much more smooth with Jose Iglesias. And he's just been putting together complete professional at bats, Iglesias, that is. And it's just something that we've been lacking for the majority of this season so far with Jeff McNeil. So I don't know if the writing's on the wall in terms of actually parting ways, but it would make sense to have this competent veteran bridge second baseman until you get into the latter part of the season, where the Mets organization has to make a decision whether they're going to be buyers, sellers, or do a little bit of a hybrid sell while trying to remain competitive for a playoff spot with maybe a Luis Angel Acuna. So we'll see how it plays out. But no, I agree with you. Alvarez being back is huge. Iglesias playing more frequently is huge. I believe you have Iglesias as the catcher, but he is playing second base today. I think everyone knows that. Is absolutely phenomenal. And Torrens, obviously, you can't ask for more as a backup catcher. So it sucks that Nito, right, was the odd man out. Am I shedding a tear about it? Like I said, I'm just going to reinforce that idea. No, I'm not. Bygones were bygones. And it just so happened that he lost his job because Luis Torrens caught fire. But no, man, we got a game today. And like I said, Rob, we talked about the last homestand potentially being that 10-game homestand being crucial for this team to prove to us fans and this organization about the trajectory of where they're going to go through this season, right? Heading closer and closer to the deadline. That's a month and a half away now. this homestand is like a second chance for them. They've been managing to stay afloat, right? Winners of 4 of their last 5. The NL is also bad with all the teams ahead of them. They have another chance here to leave all of those Citi Field woes behind them and prove to us, starting tonight against a pitcher in Jesus Luzardo that dominated them last month, right, in Miami. They have a chance to prove to us why this team, especially with those reinforcements that we're talking about, Francisco Alvarez and Edwin Diaz, if we get a glimpse of the old Edwin Diaz back, why they could make a run here to start. Now, I don't want to give anyone any sort of false optimism. I know I'm maybe being a little bit overly optimistic with the way that we've been talking about this team for the last couple of weeks, definitely before that DC series against the Nationals. But you can start to see like puzzle pieces. If the time ever comes where this team needs to make a run to prove to us, it's right now, Rob. And I think that everything that's sort of accumulating, it's the perfect storm to maybe be that. Now, like I said, I know there's a lot of people that may still want the Mets to sell. And that's also valid because you have to obviously be objective in any part of this season and realize that the Mets are battling. And I'm going to reinforce this idea because we talked about it in the offseason. We talked about it at the beginning of the season when we started doing these pre-games. The Mets are going to have a serious battle, the front office that is, juggling between trying to be competitive for a playoff spot while also holding true to that retool for 2025. And that is something that I don't want fans to lose sight of because that is still the goal. While the goal can be making a playoff spot for David Stearns in this front office, they are also still trying to probably retool this team for something greater this offseason. Both can be done, but it's hard when you're trying to balance those two out. That's all I want to say on that topic. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And David Stearns has clearly a big decision to make. But you're right; they can do both. Maybe they can get rid of a Jeff McNeil, like addition by subtraction. That might be a huge deal. Maybe Iglesias is that guy that pops up later. That was trying to get back to the majors, and he's finally found it again with the Mets. And you know what? Acuna is right there, and he could be ready to come up as well, and might give a that energy that you always get from a young player sometimes, especially a top prospect. Yeah, I mean, both can happen. And again, this is and Carlos says, "Oh, what is there to prove?" It's not about proving. It's just that the NL is so bad. 11 out of the 15 teams are under 500, and there's one team that's just at 500. So there's not a lot of teams that are very good. And because the National League is not good, the Mets are actually in a position, 3.5 games, by the way, to be right there. And that's why this homestand is important, because one of the teams you face in this homestand, in the Padres, are leading the wild card being a 500 team. And they haven't played well all season at all. And on top of that,
I'm curious.
Again,
I'm curious, not to cut you off, but on this topic, because this topic directly relates to one of those, I don't know if it's bogus or not, I'm not sure who conducted it, but one of those player polls that sort of shed light on MLB teams, right? So do you buy in? I guess the surrounding basis of the Mets making the playoffs this year in a retool year, right, is, I guess, to answer Carlos's point in the chat, or Carlos's question in chat, is maybe just to sort of make the Mets organization out to be in a better light. Now, I'm not saying I worry about those polls because, quite simple, I don't know if they're bogus or not, and I don't simply care. But you have to wonder if other players do care. Do you buy into that or do you not? I'm curious because we talked about this before.
Look, I think this is a poll that they're probably on a plane. They probably got this, it's probably on their phones, and they just, okay, yeah, this and that. Yeah, of course, the team that is not, ex players in 2022, I guarantee the Mets would have been a very popular team, right? It's just the way it is. Look, you pay the player, they're coming here. I'm sorry to say, everybody who doesn't realize that by now, right, is not paying attention to baseball nowadays. Everybody wants to get paid. They don't care where they go. I'm sorry. If the Pittsburgh Pirates actually spend money and say, you know what, we're going to go after Juan Soto because we got a great young core, and they pay the most money, he's going to Pittsburgh. I'm sorry. He's going to be on the East Coast. That's one thing for sure, because he always says he wanted to be back on the East Coast. So he's probably going to be somewhere on the East Coast. Pittsburgh is not North Dakota. Okay. It's close enough to the East Coast where it's in an hour and a half flight, not that long, to where he needs to go, it's not the end of the world. And it goes for every player. They're going to take the most money. And I don't care about those polls at all, to be quite honest with you. I mean, does anybody care that Pete Alonso was number 5 in the most overrated player? Did everybody care about that poll? Right? Yeah, exactly.
I think they're also bogus, but I figured it'd be a talking point because there is a
like,
lot of sort of like just like discussions and
you know what
murmurs
it is?
around
You
those
know,
polls.
like Joe from Clark, who calls WFAN and is always negative on Twitter. I mean, the last time he was probably positive was 2015, right? And that team was dead and buried before the trade deadline, right? So the fact is that it the people who are always negative are going to use that and see, oh, I told you so. Yet the same people that are saying this now were the same people saying that the Mets would never get Scherzer, the Mets would never get any, big time pitcher here or any time big time player. We all forget that Max Scherzer never wanted to be a Met. He did not want to be here. Why did he come here? And why do all these players go somewhere, right? Because they got the money. It's just that simple. I don't really care about that, because if the Mets have a solid offseason, regardless of if it's Soto or Santander or whoever they get, and it makes their team better, it really doesn't matter. Like, you don't think Santander would love to stay with the Orioles? Yeah, they got new owners, but that doesn't mean they're going to get him. Maybe they do go after Juan Soto, and now Santander is kind of, out in the wind now, and maybe the Mets get him, right? And that's obviously a good addition. So it's all about the money. I don't care about those player polls. I honestly don't think they care as much. They're all buddies, so I don't really think they really care. Like, they have friends everywhere. So I just think that is winning number 1 to these players. I would say no, most of them. I think it's, a close number 1. I think it's number 2. I think number 1 is getting paid. Not only is it helping themselves contract wise to make them say, oh, look at this contract. They're in a union, and we forget about that nobody's taking less money if you're a top 10 player just to, make another team happy or make the fans happy. They don't care, right? They really don't care, right? You think Pete Alonso, who another report came out saying he's looking for $200 million. If the Mets don't give that to him and somebody else does, he's gone. It's just like every other player. So, Chris, I see it like this. The fact is, pay the player and they'll come. I don't care who the team is. It's very simple. But this homestand is important. And not only are we facing one of the worst teams in baseball, I know the Marlins always give the Mets trouble, regardless if they're good or bad. But you got to take, we said this on the roundtable, we got to take 2 or 3. I would be satisfied with 2 out of 3, but you got to sweep them. I'm sorry. They're a bad team. They don't do anything right. I know the Mets don't do a lot of things right, but they're better than this team. And I think they're better than what their record says. Like, we've been saying this forever, and maybe we're just delusional, but I don't think we are. I think we've seen enough from this team that if they put it together all at the same time, this team is a hell of a lot better. This team can easily be a 500 team, if not a game or 2 over. We talked about how many games we lost in May, 7th inning or later, that we either led or was a tie game. You split those games, you're right there at the 500 level, and then we'll be talking about the playoff spot because we'll be either a game or tied for a wild card spot. You're playing the Padres, you're playing the Marlins. A bad team in the Marlins, you got to beat them. 2 out of 3 at the least. A sweep. I wouldn't even be excited about a sweep. I think that has to happen because they're better than this team, especially with Alvarez back. And I feel like the pitching staff is going to be better because of him. I think that needs to happen. I think 2 out of 3, obviously, is an obvious win total in this series. And the Padres, you got to beat them. If you take 2 out of 3 out of the Padres, guess what, guys? By the end of this homestand, the Mets could be in a wildcard spot if things fall out the right way. Because nobody's playing well in the National League. It's not giving credit to the Mets. It's just that the National League is bad. And fortunate for the Mets, because they could have been dead and buried if 5 teams in the National League were above 500. They would be in trouble. But you know what? They're not in trouble because of the National League. And whoever says that, oh, I don't care if the team makes the playoffs at 500, they're going to get blown out. How do you know that? You don't know that. Have you watched the playoff the last couple of years? Teams that are inferior to the superior teams have been winning in the playoffs. You just got to get hot at the right time. But unfortunately for the Mets, Chris, to stop my rant, you got 43 games left until the trade deadline. Yes, I did the math. That's why they don't have that luxury of August and September unless they prove that they can be right now. If they're 3.5 games at the trade deadline, what do you think Stern's going to do? You think he's going to do, partial sell, partial buy, or because that's going to be interesting. Because 3.5 games, not a lot of games. It's one series away from getting right back in it. So listen, be within a game. Give him no choice. Maybe Jeff McNeil still gets traded just to get that terrible vibe out of the clubhouse. But listen, we got an opportunity again, another homestand where you have an opportunity to prove to the front office and prove to your fans that, you know what, this season is not dead on June 16th when the homestand ends. At least that's what I think, Chris.
I really do think, before we get into this actual matchup, I have a couple points here. I really do think, for the people that are worried that the Mets aren't going to get the maximal return for these guys, I really don't think, and I'm going to stay to this word no matter what happens, that the Mets front office and David Stearns is naive enough to pass up on getting assets for veteran players, because at the end of the day, there are still kids that need to come up from the minor league systems and get playing time, regardless of how many games back in the wild card this Mets team is, or even if they are in one of those spots. David Stearns is going to make the necessary moves to free up roster spots to bring who he wants to see compete and be a part of this 2025 team, whether it's at the MLB level, whether that means re-signing Luis Severino, or whether that means trading a Jeff McNeil and bringing up Luis Angel Acuna, whether that means moving Sean Manaea to the bullpen, right, and bringing up whatever pitcher XYZ you want to bring up and see innings from them in the rest of 2024. So that's not my concern whatsoever. I believe in this front office. I believe in David Stearns. And I understand that regardless of where they are in the standings category, they are going to do whatever it takes to get the assets and free up roster spots, regardless. Because either way, right, whether the veterans are playing or whether the young kids are playing, I still think that's probably an equivalent chance, given the talent level of this team across the board, to make a run. You know what I mean? So it doesn't really matter unless you're talking about selling off Luis Severino, which, if your goal is to make the playoffs, that's just not really the best thing to do. I think everything else considered, you can win some and you can lose some there in terms of the actual trading the actual player versus bringing up the prospects, if that makes sense. But secondly, to go off this homestand, I actually put up a poll in the community tab on my channel earlier today. Make sure you go vote. Minimum games the Mets would have to win on this homestand to convince you all to start believing in this team again. I said 4 because that's 2 series wins. That's the bare minimum I can ask for. If you had to ask me what would totally convince me, it'd probably be 5, which means sweeping the damn Marlins, because there's no reason for the Mets not to sweep the Marlins. And we can talk about the Mets as they move to the deadline all we want. We have a game tonight. We're talking about Jesus Luzardo versus Tyler McGill. We can talk deadline talk all we want, but we have a game tonight, so we might as well talk about it. Mets versus Marlins. You gotta win today's ball game, because honestly, the way this shook out last time in Miami, an 8-0 loss, if I'm not mistaken, with Jesus Luzardo on the mound, if that repeats itself tonight against this lowly Marlins team that have only won 1 game in their last 8 matchups, that's going to be a problem in front of the home crowd, and you will hear some boos. Because listen, this is a time where I'm not saying every single Mets fan has like a sliver of hope, but we're like teetering. We're like, all right, we're kind of looking at him with a side eye. Like, all right, what are you going to do here? Like, it's up to you all to show us what you're going to do. But you know what I mean? They can't go out there and lay an egg. They can't go out there and lay up 0 runs against Jesus Luzardo, who is struggling all-encompassing this season, right? But we know that he has the tools to shut any lineup down, just like he did to the Mets in May. So I like this lineup, but are they going to start hitting at Citi Field? And if we're going to be talking about the Mets and playoffs in the same sentence, and we got people in here that are like laughing at that notion, and I don't blame them for not believing or laughing. I don't blame them at all. Like, I'm honestly almost on their side as well. I'm like on an even split here. But it's June 11th, so I might as well root for some winning baseball. But they're going to have to go out there and hit. And you know what? They can't just hit on the road. They have to hit at home. Change that. And it has to happen this week. It has to happen today on June 11th. And yeah, I would be kind of pissed if we win 2 of 3. That's the bare minimum that I said I would accept. But it should be a sweep, man. It really should be a sweep. I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what is, and you know, I know a lot of people are laughing about this and stuff, but you know what? I think the players realize, and I think the second game in London, I thought was so important for the team, and let's be honest, the fan base as well, because when it was 3-0, everybody was like, "Oh, here we go, we're gonna get embarrassed overseas."
Who was out of it?
Yeah, and I don't think anybody thought we were coming back. And then when we scored those 3 runs, it did feel like the Mets had that type of energy. You know, you heard the crowd that was mostly Philly fans, right? You heard those Met fans, and they got loud, even though it was like 70-30, which I don't think anybody should have expected differently, basically on what the team was doing. But yeah, I mean, I felt like after that win and the dramatic fashion that we won it, it kind of revitalized the Met fans, not in saying, "Oh, we got hope," but I'm telling you, everybody who says they're not looking at the stand-ins, they're looking at the stand-ins. I'm sorry. You just have to, because we all know that in 43 games, it can be over for the season. And we're talking about the young kids coming up. And some might say, "Oh, well, that's great." Yeah, but do you really want to go through 3 months of not caring about a baseball game and just watching to see if these kids are going to be any good? Because what happens if end of July, August, and September, these kids come up and they're absolutely terrible? Then where's the belief, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you're not going to take those 2 months to say, "Oh my God, they're trash." But we don't know, right? We could talk about these guys till the cows come home. We don't know if they're very good. We don't know, right? They're top prospects, but we've seen a lot of top prospects fail in baseball, and specifically with the New York Mets. So, you know, I don't want to make everybody be a downer here, but we have to understand that everybody just wants the kids up, but that means that we have another losing season, and you got 3 months of not important baseball. And who wants to deal with that during the summer when the Yankees are doing what they're doing? And if you live in New York, you hear it every single day. I'm in North Carolina and I hear it, right? And, you know, we see it every day, right? And you have to understand, this Mets team got a second chance. Like, as bad as the record is and bad as the NL, we got a second chance. And that's all you can go by. You can't go by what happens 3 weeks from now. You can't happen what happens after the homestand, because what if the Mets do have a 4-2, 5-1, 6-0 homestand? I know that's crazy to think that because they don't win at home, but if they do, how many people are going to be coming back as Met fans and be like, "All right, let's go"? The people who don't care or have jumped off the bandwagon, they'll be right back on, because you only need that sliver of hope as a fan to continue watching this team. And if they do that, Chris, I can guarantee Met fans on X, on YouTube, on any social media platform are going to start, not, I wouldn't say believing, but have a little more confidence in this team. And it starts tonight.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it just seems like an endless cycle. And we could be talking about being roped back in and they go on a 6-game losing streak and they're like, "Okay, wow, we just fell for that again." Like it's inevitable. We're Mets fans. We're gonna do it like in one way or another. You know what I mean? It's like not realistic not to ask a fan. You can be objective, but also have that subjective side of you and just hope for wins and pulling in within a game or a half game of the wild card. Like, I'd rather just see this team win than be, watching meaningless baseball. But nonetheless, that may just be me. That might be an unpopular opinion. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, before we close out the stream, because it is just about a couple of minutes, if not one single minute until first pitch, Tyler McGill is on the bump today. He's looked pretty impressive, had a little bit of a shakeup there in terms of his outing in Washington, but was solid the previous 2 outings. Very curious how he goes out there and performs in front of the home crowd. Quite simple, to reinforce the notion that the Mets need a sweep right now, besides Christian Scott, who is a complete different talking point, not eligible to come back until June 15th, I believe, which is in 4 days. This will be the second go around of the rotation that he's going to miss, by the way, because of that send down prior to the London series, which I've already exhausted. I gave my opinions on, and I'm just going to shut my mouth from there because you all know how I feel about it. It was a mistake. but onward we move. Right now, I think that what the Mets have in the 5-man rotation, this might be the Mets' best 3 pitchers. And David Peterson's lumped into that category because right now I trust him more than Sean Manaea and Jose Quintana put together combined. This is the best Mets 3 pitchers that they have to send out there against a lowly Marlins team. And if they don't perform, then I don't know what to tell you. Needs to be a sweep, and that's all I'm going to say. Am I going to come back here and complain about 2 of 3? I'm not, but I'd like to see a sweep. Let's go, Tyler McGill. Put some runs on the board for Tyler McGill early, please. Because the way you won that ball game against Philly in that London game and in game 2, I don't want to see that crap anymore. I don't. I love the late offense because it's exciting, but the process is bad. Score early and often. And I know Jesus Luzardo is a great pitcher. Not going to take anything away from him. But let's not act like he's been a superstar this season. He's got great stuff, but other teams have gotten to him this season. The Mets can do it too. I promise. I promise. Let's go Mets. That's all I got. Oh, by the way, post game today, I actually will be joined by my buddy Nick from the He Did This To Me podcast. We did Knicks post games together. He's a Mets fan as well. He'll be joining me tonight on the Mets post game. So I know you're out for it, Rob. If anything changes, let me know. But right back on my channel, we're going to be talking about Mets versus Marlins game 1 tonight, hopefully after a win. See you all there.
Absolutely. So make sure you check that post game out right after the game with him and Nick. And yes, absolutely. Listen, Tyler McGill, give him some damn runs. These pitches, this starting pitching never has a lead. Give them a lead. And if they blow it, we blame the pitchers. But it seems like we blame the offense. And we usually don't blame the offense because they try to come back in games. But it's just a terrible look to try to always come back in games. It's exciting, but like Chris says, you got to score early. Give your pitcher a lead and give him some breathing room and put the pressure on the other team for once. How about that? Get the fans involved early. That's important, especially at Citi Field. So make sure you tune into the post-game time with Chris and Nick and subscribe to the channels, guys. Make sure we're going to continue to do this all season. Win or lose, we will be here. So, and make sure you follow the Mets Roundtable podcast on X, Mets RT Pod on X. So make sure you follow. So with that said, let's get a W, guys, with Tyler McGill on the mound. We'll see you next time. Let's go Mets, guys.
Let's go Mets.